Good evening and welcome to the Jay Duke Show, streaming live on 5 channels this evening. We're on Facebook at Equivault, the Jay Duke page, the Jumping Instructors Live page, Dressage Instructors Live, and also on YouTube. I'd like to thank my producers, Laura Kelland-May and Randy Thompson, making everything happen in the background for us. Tonight's show, the Jay Duke Show, is presented by Pacific Equine Sport. Founded by Canadian FEI course designers, Pacific Equine Sport is a multifaceted equestrian services company based in Alberta, Canada. From first-rate tournaments to the production and distribution of prime jump equipment and accessories across the continent, PES is focused on bringing home its industry expertise to help facilitate good sport and the proper development of horses and riders in Canada and beyond. Check it out at www.pacificequinesport.com. Joining me tonight is an expert panel to discuss head safety, health awareness, and those nasty concussions. Welcome to Dr. Kelly Ryan. Dr. Ryan specializes in treating concussions, orthopedic injuries, injury prevention, nutrition, and the training needs of athletes. She is the co-medical director of the Horsemen's Health Program at Maryland Racetracks. Mr. Eric Vanderhelm. Eric works with Headcheck Health and is a manager of sales initiatives where he connects solutions with sports organization needs. Eric holds a BSc in psychology from Queen's University. And former jockey, Mr. Robert Colton. He had 4,000 wins on the racetrack and retired in the top 50 in the world all time. Robert also worked as a stunt jockey on the best horse racing movie of all time, Seabiscuit. For the past 15 years, Robert has been the administrator of the Delaware Jockeys Health and Welfare Fund. This year, he will be a steward at Delaware Park, overseeing enforcing racing rules and integrity of the sport. Welcome to all, and thank you so much for joining me. This topic tonight is very meaningful to me. I suffered several concussions as a rider, and one was a very serious one that took place in 2001, and it changed my life in many ways. Unfortunately, none of them were for the better, and it's been a lot of work to move forward and get back to what we would like to call a normal life. So I'm always advocating for rider safety. Of course, horse welfare goes along with that. But tonight we're talking about the riders and doing everything we can to make sure that riders are as safe as possible, and what we can do with that at home at the farms, and what we can do with that at the horse shows, and what you can do to make sure that you or your children are as safe as possible. So I want to start off tonight with Mr. Robert Colton. He has a great story about an experience that he had, and I don't know if he won, was this one of his 4,000 wins or not, but Robert, let's hand it over to you and tell us your background in this, please.
I basically been on horses the majority of my life, especially since the end of high school, and rode for about 27 years. So I became an expert in concussion more as a end user, or should I say an abuser, suffering probably 10 to 12 concussions. Probably the most severe, I was probably out, in the vicinity to 4 or 5 hours. I had 3-4 where I was out well over an hour. So, it's certainly anytime you're on or near a horse, boy, they can hurt you really quick. And, concussions are an area that are really lacking, or at least concussion protocols are seriously lacking in horse racing. Kelly Ryan, and now with Eric Vanderhelm's help, we've really trying to push forward with this. So probably one of the best stories I had on it, one of the many, was this one was almost like one out of the Twilight Zone for those that remember the short television series with Rod Sterling back from the 50s. I woke up what I thought was a dream, and I'm driving down a road, and I don't know where I'm at. And all I'm doing about 50, 60 miles an hour on a 4-lane road, and I'm head on at cars coming at me at 50, 60 miles an hour. And I'm shaking, and is this a dream? And I pull the car into one of the lanes I should be in, and I look around, and I don't know whose car I'm driving. I look down, and I'm covered in mud, and I had no idea where I'm at. And I see a Bank of America, so my mind could still operate the car. I could still read. I pull over to the bank, and I see a phone on the seat. I know it's a phone, a cell phone. I know how to operate it. Don't know whose phone it is. Open it up. I see this name, Deirdre, 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 Deirdre. I dialed Deirdre. I was always pretty much a jokester most of my life. And, she answers, Bobby. And I say, ma'am? Says, Bobby. Says, ma'am, I need to have you help me. And she's, Bobby, knock it off. This is Deirdre. Says, ma'am, I'm driving this custom blue van. I'm at a Bank of America next to some sporting facility. It's got lights, and I don't know where I'm at. And I'm freaking out, and I'm about to call 911. So I'm covered in mud, and I don't know what to do. She says, stay there, don't move. So I'm just sit there, and I'm watching, people come in and out of the bank, and I see this car pull up, and this really beautiful lady gets out of the car. And I think during my concussion research, I think I found the hardest substance, at least in the world, if maybe not the universe, and that's the male mind, how it just continues to go that way. And he comes and knocks on my car door, and I'm like looking at it, and I roll the window down and said, can I help you, ma'am? She goes, Bobby. Boy, did my eyes light up. You're Deirdre? And wow, I'm way above my pay grade. I said it just like that. So you're still disgusting. And I said, so we're boyfriend and girlfriend? Yeah. And we're going to go home? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, wow. So she had called while she was driving over to get me. And apparently I had been on a horse in the morning training at Lone Star Park in Dallas, Texas. And I was coming back from the racetrack after working this horse, and the horse had reared up and flipped, and I had hit my head on we were on a park crossing the road, and hit my head on the road, got up kind of staggering, they said I got back on the horse, rode him back to the barn, unsaddled the horse, asked if there was any more work, got in my van and drove away. And, that's, what concussions can do, to certain people. I had, to this day, no recollection of that day. Had no recollection of going back to our apartment there,
right,
looking at pictures of my kids. Took a couple days to gain my memory. Fortunately, I think the majority of it came back. But it's just really strange. And I know you, Jay, you've had a fallen, and how it affects us, in different ways. Just sometimes I would, after concussion, I would literally feel sound that would just hurt so bad, or see light that would just come at me and hurt.
There's so many different things that can happen, and so many different symptoms, and it does really vary from case to case. Dr. Ryan, I'm sure you're familiar with stories like this all the time. What's happening today to help people in this situation? Because obviously Robert shouldn't have been allowed to leave the racetrack and get in his car or his van. What do you see is happening today? Even let's go to the competitions to help prevent this sort of incident from happening.
So I think that we know a lot more about concussions now than we did even 5-10 years ago. There's been so much new research, concussion research, particularly in other sports. So it's been slower in horse racing and other equestrian sports, kind of bringing what we know from football, lacrosse, those types of things. I'm trying to adapt them to the equestrian world because it's similar in some aspects. But what I've learned from starting at the racetrack is it's very different than other sports. And, the injuries are much different. The medical care is much different. And the problem in the United States right now is there's also a varying level of medical care at different places, whether it be state by state, in different organizations. There's not one overseeing body like we have for the NFL or the NHL, those types of things, who are overseeing these protocols and things like that. So it's been unfortunately more of like a track to track basis or, group to group, those types of things. But what we're trying to do is just adapt what we know from concussions in other sports to our equestrian concussions. And, just like Robert was saying, I've seen people who have fallen off of horses going 40 miles an hour and wake up and they stand up and they're perfectly fine and they don't have a concussion. I've seen terrible accidents where a horse just headbutted a rider and they have a concussion for 3 months. So it's very unpredictable. But we're really trying to work on expanding the education that we have and particularly management of concussions to make sure that riders are aware about signs and symptoms, not just for themselves, because, like Robert was saying, one of the problems with concussions is that when you have a concussion, you don't really know that you have it. So looking out for your fellow equestrian teammates and things like that, because you're probably not going to notice at that time. So it's really important to know what the signs and symptoms are, and everything's a little bit different. So, just kind of having a broad understanding of what to look for and also why it's so dangerous.
So with you have obviously vast experience. This is your area of specialty. If you've potentially suffered a concussion, because there's lots of times people won't realize that that's happened, but let's say there's a chance, even if it's a 10% chance that you may have received a concussion, what would be the steps before you should get back on a horse?
So first of all, you don't even have to hit your head to have a concussion, which is one thing that a lot of people don't realize. Even if you get tossed off of a horse, if you think about how tall horses are, that's a significant weight to the ground. So even if you hit your body, but not necessarily your head can still get jarred. You also can get a concussion like in a car accident when you don't even hit your head. So anytime that you have a fall or, you've been jarred, I always recommend that riders err on the side of caution, because up to 20% of concussions aren't diagnosed on the first day. And the dangers of potentially getting back on a horse when you may have a concussion is that if, first of all, your balance isn't the same, your depth perception isn't the same, your reaction time is not the same, so you risk having other injuries from not being able to react to the horse the same way. And then if you were to get hit a second time, that's when really bad things happen, when you haven't recovered from one head injury and you're at a higher risk of getting another one, because again, you're not as well as you typically are. And then you have a second one. That's when people really have long-term side effects.
Yes, absolutely. And that is when the biggest risk is to people physically as well. And when you have some of the serious health issues and can develop in the CTE that can develop, it's the multiple concussions that are the issue. Talking about helmets here, Robert, I assumed when this accident happened to you, you were wearing a helmet. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I was wearing a helmet, and it was a certified helmet that it was manufactured to a standard. But as Kelly was saying, the G forces that we could sustain, once he threw me up and I hit hard cement, the helmet did its job in preventing any fractures.
Right.
But it didn't, your brain stops, or your skull stops, and your brain just keeps moving. And it just, obviously hit the side of my skull pretty hard. But I always, tried to have, very good equipment when I rode, from, both helmet. Was one of the first to start wearing a safety vest. Trying to make sure that it was always in good shape. And one of the most important part is to make sure that it fits properly. You can have a really good helmet, but if it doesn't stay on your head or twist, and then you're compromising what that helmet can do. So for any of you young jump riders, just make sure that the helmet fits properly. And they do make different shell types of helmets. Some are oval shape, some are circular shape. So just make sure that the helmet is designed properly for the head.
And Dr. Wren, we were talking about riding helmets, and we were talking about football helmets, and certainly I'm not an expert on the topic of helmets, but They say with the riding helmets that if the helmet has suffered a blow, even as little as, say, just dropping it on the ground onto a hard surface from your hand, it does compromise the integrity of that helmet. How can you explain what the difference is, say, with a football helmet? These guys are hitting each other, 100 times a game with the same helmet, and they'll use that helmet, I think, in high school and college for the year. I'm not sure about the professionals. I can't speak to that. But say, I know in high school, they'll use the same helmet all year, and they're hitting it all the time. But in show jumping, and I assume in racehorses, you have to get it replaced as soon as it delivers a blow. So what's the difference there, and why is that important?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I've learned the most about since starting sports medicine is learning about different types of helmets. And so football helmets, they're made for different type of impacts. So it's multiple impacts, as opposed to an equestrian helmet, which is really there to protect you if you were to fall off the horse, land on your head, if a horse were to step on you, those types of things. So the materials are going to be different. The foam is different inside, and you could relate an equestrian helmet to like a bicycle helmet, where once it has an impact, it loses its integrity. They've done a couple studies where they've actually damaged the helmets, and they created an impact, and then they actually looked at it visually, and they said, oh, this looks fine. But when they did a CT scan of it, they actually noticed that there were cracks in the foam. And this is pretty well-known fact. So if you do have a significant fall, even if it doesn't look cracked, you have to replace your helmet. It's very, very important. There's been a lot of debate about whether or not helmets are going to ever prevent concussions, and they will never fully prevent concussions, because you can get a concussion even without hitting your head. Again, the purpose of an equestrian helmet is to protect your skull from being, crushed if you were to get stepped on. And for the most part, they are pretty, they are good. One of the things that we worry about and that we're always debating about is how can we make standard testing better? Right now, essentially what you do is you take a helmet, you smack it with an anvil head on, and then you see how well it stands up to that test. But what we're really trying to push for in the future is being able to also be able to create standards with rotational forces, because that's where we think that some of the concussions might be coming from. And that's what a lot of the other helmet testing is doing. So trying to take what we've learned from other helmets and perform that testing on our equestrian helmets. But again, the biggest thing that you can do for your helmets is make sure if you have a fall that you replace it, that you keep it in a neutral temperature zone. Don't keep it in places that are really cold. Don't keep it in places that are really hot, because the materials can expand and constrict. And then don't take it and throw it in the back of your car or in the back of your locker. Please make sure to take care of it, because it takes care of your head.
Well, yes.
Jay, one quick comment on this.
Yes.
What was difficult for even the football leagues especially the NFL, to get better helmets was the mirror test. And that's one of the biggest problems even in horse racing. And I'm not sure what it is in the equestrian dressage world. When I say the mirror test, people put on a helmet and they don't want to see this huge helmet on their head.
Of course.
Now, there was a helmet that came out of Australia a few years ago that was hands down the best helmet made for horse racing. Just blew all the other helmets away as far as testing. Riders wouldn't wear it in Australia. And it's similar to what started in football when they first came out with larger helmets. And if you look at football helmets now, for the most part, they're bigger than our equine, and they don't have to, go 40 miles an hour. And, for the most part, they can wear the bigger helmet. It makes it hard when you've got to have your side vision, during a race to make sure you're seeing well. You can't make sure that you're not blocked. But that's also been a problem. It's just the mirror test. Riders don't want a big helmet on their head.
Just real quick, I want to make sure that all of our viewers out there know that in some of these helmet companies, you can look to check to see whether or not they offer any reimbursements or exchanges for those types of things, because there are certain programs that are out there, especially if you've had a fall, Sometimes they'll give you a discount. There's also places that are looking for helmet donations. If you've had a fall and you know that you had a concussion, being able to look at these helmets and be able to study them is actually really important as well. So those are other things that we're kind of looking to do. And there's been some other groups that have done such things, but there are certain programs out there. You just have to be looking for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, the helmet companies, they definitely work with you because they want you to be safe as well. And so if you have had a blow to the head, or again, if you've just dropped your helmet while you were carrying it and you're concerned about it, talk to your helmet rep, or contact the tack shop where you picked it up. Eric, let's transition over to you now. I don't know if Headcheck Health has anything to do with helmets and such, but what your business is in is really fascinating as far as helping to keep people safe, to help preventing that second concussion. Obviously, we've just talked about is there's no way to completely stop it, but there is ways to be aware of it and to monitor it and to create a back to ride protocol. So can you tell us a little bit about Headcheck Health, please?
Sure. So there's been sort of an evolution in sport where organizations have developed, or they're starting to develop, concussion protocols. And what the founders of Headcheck realized many years ago was that there wasn't really a good way to make sure that the protocol was actually being followed. So Headcheck is a platform and a set of tools that brings together everyone, and there's a lot of people that are involved in executing the concussion protocol. We don't create the concussion protocol, we just help them to make sure that they can actually enforce that it's being followed. So what you do when you adopt Headcheck with your sports organization is you provide your members with a really clear action plan for how to execute the protocol. And you're giving them access to information that helps them make the right decision every step of the way, from reporting the concussion, the suspected concussion, to recovery, to clearance to return to the sport. It achieves this by providing those people with different levels of access and visibility on the system, depending on their medical background or their affiliation to the athlete. So basically their need to know. And this is one of the key ways that the system maintains its compliance to health privacy law. And in the case of the USA, that's HIPAA compliance. The reason it works so well is that everyone that ends up using the system finds that it both saves them time and it gives them some peace of mind knowing that they've done their part for the protocol, because it's logged and it's time-stamped in the system. So for example, this looks different for an EMT that's going through the digitized SCAT-5 concussion test in the system versus a steward that's quickly checking their phone to make sure that all the jockeys that are racing that day are actually eligible to ride. So since last November, Robert, Dr. Ryan, and I have been working together on how to tweak the system, because as Dr. Ryan mentioned, it's mostly concussion protocols have mostly been arising in football, hockey, soccer, and we're making this system more relevant to the horse racing industry. So for example, we've created a digital version of the Maryland first report of incident so that all injuries can be reported on the system and not just concussions. So the stewards, for example, are one of the key players, and they're essentially the last line of defense against the jockeys riding when they shouldn't be. And with Headcheck, for example, they can have access to a live dashboard showing them all the riders that aren't eligible to ride right from their smartphone. Wow. So at the end of the day, Headcheck is about giving athletes the space and the time that they need to recover before putting themselves and the organizations they're with at risk. Because like Dr. Ryan mentioned, the big risks come from when you have a second concussion before you've recovered from your first one. So we're just making sure nothing slips through the cracks.
And how
if I can expand on just what Eric said just a little, Jay. So as now as a regulator, I'm a steward this year, and I've been a steward before up to a couple years ago. In a business that it's very fibers built on competition, individual competition, where from horse to horse, jockey to jockey, horse owner to horse owner, track to track. The last thing that I was going to do as a rider was lose my business. If I go down, I'm going to cowboy up, get back on the next horse. And
you were taught that way.
I was more worried about losing my business than I am worried about injured myself or other riders. So now we have, through Headcheck, we have dynamic instant notification. When a rider goes down, we have a protocol in place. If a rider goes down in a race or in warming up above a certain speed, if they're galloping, that automatically we'll send an alert to here at Delaware. We don't have a doctor on the track, but we do have a certified athletic trainer, sports trainer, that rider will have to go see that sports trainer. Mm-hmm. And if that sports trainer sees any concussion, that they instantly are removed from the horse, and then will have to be cleared by a doctor. And that notification goes to all tracks, all stewards, and all individuals that are participating in this nationwide. So it's great, before, I'd ride Delaware Park, get hit last race and a little foggy. All right, I'm going to Penn or Madeline's that night. Oh yeah, I'm fine. And you don't even tell, Dr. Ryan can tell all kind of horror stories where, they tell the rider to go to the next track and they would tell Dr. Ryan after they rode, oh yeah, I went down 2 days ago. And so now we have a software solution that can instantly let us know what's going on.
And Dr. Ryan, how has that affected you as far as from a medical side? Has this been, and what has been the reaction from the medical field to this sort of information?
Yeah, I'm going to step back just a second because we went to Headcheck, but just a quick basic understanding of what a concussion protocol is. So if a rider comes off of the horse, then they're required to be evaluated. This isn't the same across the entire country or across all equestrian sports at this time, unfortunately. These decisions should be made by regulators to protect the rider so that the riders don't have to make the decision to not ride, and that's the biggest thing that I can, hope to educate everyone is our regulators are the ones that need to put these in place, and we need to have trained professionals who understand concussions and can evaluate them, properly, because not every fall is a concussion. And so you don't want to take your riders out if they don't have to be, but you want to be able to catch them when it is dangerous, because it can be dangerous to other riders, and they're putting themselves at risk for even worse injuries. So that needs to be decided not at the time of event. That needs to be decided in discussions like this, ahead of time. And that needs to be put in writing. And that's why Eric's group with Headcheck has been so wonderful with us, because yes, we all know that the horse world is very unique. It's very different than any other sport. And it's very dangerous. And so we want to make sure that we have all these things in place so that we know exactly what to do when a rider falls and how to get them back to riding safely, because it's a little bit of a process. It's not just, oh, you have a sprained ankle, once you're better, you get back. It's a slow progression that we do to make sure that your brain is 100%. And I'm not going to put you on a horse if you're not 100% yet, because it's too dangerous. You just get on a horse and they look at you the wrong way and they toss you out, those types of things. So, but this is a nice way to organize it. And this is a nice way to keep records, and doctors need to keep records, and it needs to be fair for everyone. So that's really why we like this program. They've been excellent with working with us specifically to meet our needs. And we hope that this is going to be an excellent way to communicate in the future.
Well, I need
Jay, if any of your viewers would want the protocol, I have them contact you, and I would gladly share what our protocol is, which Kelly basically wrote, and I have it both in Spanish and English, and it's posted in the jockey's room. Our emerging medical services have it, as do the stewards. Everybody's thoroughly understanding of it. And we go even further. At the time of licensing, all of our jockeys have to initial and sign that they have read the protocols and they understand it, that if once those starting gate opens and they go off, they cannot ride until they're medically cleared.
Well, I know you guys think the racehorse industry is a little behind other sports, and I agree. I believe, as far as the best of my knowledge, that jumping is even further behind.
Wow.
I think I need Dr. Ryan on my campaign team, because I've been saying for years that this needs to come from the federations, and definitely there has been great strides made, and I certainly want to acknowledge that. But they're really still, to me, there's so many gaps, and I see it. We were competing this winter in California, and I would see people fall and clearly hit their head, not necessarily be knocked out, but you definitely clearly get a blow to the head. And there was no testing or anything really done. Now I'm an advocate to get that there should be somebody on site that is able to diagnose that there's a potential for a concussion or potential for concussion symptoms, not just okay, I hit my head, it might happen, but there's somebody actually there that's trained to do that. Dr. Ryan, what is that reasonable to have somebody on at a sporting event that is able to pick up, I know in the football they take you in the 10, they give you a 2-minute test and they can say, yeah, you're in or out right now. It doesn't seem that complicated to me.
So let me tell you about a fantastic profession of athletic trainers. And so these are certified athletic trainers who have gone through a lot of training. They're the ones who are on the sidelines. They're the ones picking the football players up. They're the ones who are helping the soccer leagues and those types of things. And I'm going to be honest with you, they're cheaper than I am, and I spend a lot of my time in the office and those types of things. I'm there during races, but I'm not there in the mornings. And so our athletic trainers are people who are able to evaluate athletes. They're trained to work with athletes. They're used to working with them. They help them with any type of injury, and they're very good with dealing with concussions. So, it would be a great person to have at your meets or, all of these different events. If you're not going to have a primary care sports medicine physician who specializes in concussions, there is another profession that does really well. And that's actually Robert has an athletic trainer at the Delaware Park racetrack, and they are like an extension of us. So I am always in contact with my athletic trainers. If there's an injury that they need to consult me on, they'll get me in, I can get them into my office right away. And they do a fantastic job of evaluating for a suspected concussion. It's easy to suspect a concussion. It's a little bit more difficult to manage, through those types of things. So those are alternatives to help you to actually be on the track or, at the meet and those types of things. Whereas EMS, a lot of people are trying to use EMS, and you can train an EMS provider. They know how to resuscitate someone and bring them back from the dead. But they're not really trained in concussions. They're trained in neurology, but it's not the same.
No.
So I think that it's important to have EMS there, because if if there's open fractures or if there's, really traumatic injuries, it's need to sweep and go. But your athletic trainers, like I said, again, are specially trained in concussions. One of the things that I've been doing is taking what we already know from our sports medicine world, which I didn't write the protocol. I just took all of my friends who are, brilliant in other countries that are doing this at other racetracks and, in other sports. And I've just taken what they've already put together and the best guidelines and adapted it to horse racing. And what we've also tried to do is take the horse racing world to our medical professionals, so they understand when they have a jockey that comes in or when they have a rider that comes in, what does that look like getting back on a horse? Because that's a lot different than getting back onto the field. And so communicating, and our doctors want to work with equestrian, athletes. They find it very interesting. So you could also just reach out to local doctors who are sports medicine trained and say, hey, listen, we're having this event. Would you be interested in volunteering your time? And if we have any patients, then we'll send them to you. And we make relationships like that. So, that's another way to reach out. You never know what you might get.
That's a good point. And reaching out, I think it does start though with the federations. We have the USEF in the United States, and we have Equestrian Canada up here in the Great White North. Eric, how would you propose to lobby these organizations? Because this seems to me just common sense. This isn't that complicated. It just seems common sense when you look at it, and it doesn't seem that super, too difficult to implement. Eric, how should myself, how should people watching this show approach to make these sort of changes happen?
I'm going to stop real quick and also intervene for Eric. Eric, can you also discuss the great opportunity that you offer your clients, where you could help them to establish relationships with local athletic trainers and such?
Yeah, so I mean, Headcheck it brings people together. We're not charging people for the users. We're finding out how to have as many users as possible using the system. So whether that be a doctor, a nearby doctor that wants to get involved and treat these patients, or an athletic training company that wants to use the system. I mean, to be honest, they're typically not the ones paying for it, but they're the ones that love to use it. And so I guess when it comes to getting people to use Headcheck, unfortunately, it seems like common sense to a lot of people. It doesn't always seem like common sense to everyone that I talk to try to convince somebody that you should give somebody a better tool to be able to make sure that they're doing the right thing. It isn't always immediately apparent to them, and typically cost isn't the concern because it's not a super expensive software. And I think, generally the benefit of using a system, adopting a standard operating procedure essentially is not always immediately apparent. Like Robert said, the jockey or the horse jumper might want to race that day. Their fans, their agents, they want them to race, but I'm sure that same jockey doesn't want to have lifelong complications just because of one day. And I think it's also safe to say that any executive of a sports organization would want to know if the protocol that was mandated by them wasn't being followed. So, it's one thing to get information out there to people, and it's the next step for those progressive and proactive organizations to take an active role in monitoring and ensuring compliance. And the best way to implement Headcheck would be to make it that baseline standard operating procedure for how everyone in your organization executes the protocol, because to be honest, otherwise it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so similar to horse racing though, Jay, if you had a athlete, that was jumping and they register into the system, wherever they would go, if you're using the system, you just open up, a laptop. It's also mobile apps. We've iPhone, Android, and it's able to be used at that event. So, it makes it, we will share all of our riders. So rider only has to be put in the system one time. Rider might ride 12, 15, 20 different tracks in a year. And if the track is using Headcheck, the rider doesn't have to be re-injured. And the EMS on that side, the doctor at that track, they can see what type of concussion, or now we're also using it for other injuries where a rider has to be medically cleared for any suspected injury before they can get back on a horse. So Headcheck is we're able to adapt it to horse racing, which is going to be a little similar to your sport. It's pretty nomadic, where you have a lot of transit individuals constantly traveling to different jumping events. And it could be, once you're in the system, they just go in, check in, and you're in. And then also in a way to enforce protocols, as we've developed. As we start adding tracks, we're making sure that they have a injury and concussion protocol before we're going to let them work with us. They have to have a way of taking care of a rider, and also having, to try and have it so when any rider is possibly injured that they have to be seen.
Excellent.
And some other benefits to organizations is, one, it can help with your workers' comp because the reports are there, so it's easy to keep track of the injuries for that purpose. Two, it helps for medical liability, so your tracks can actually can create their own waivers for the riders to sign, which covers you, again, from a medical liability standpoint. And if there were something that a rider was going to argue, then they've been informed and they already signed that this is how we do things here, which is really nice. From a medical professional, if I am a doctor in the community, I can get you could always send a copy of the report. You could either print out a copy or, have access to be able to make sure that the community providers can get copies of those types of things, because it's a nice record keeping. And then from an epidemiology standpoint, it's really important to know what kind of injuries we're following, because if there's a lot of injuries at the starting gate, or if there's a lot of injuries at one place and maybe not as many injuries at another place, then people can take a look and say, hey, is there something from a public health standpoint that we should be doing differently? Or is there something going on that we need to improve our safety at, one place compared to another place? And so for all of those reasons, it's I've looked at many different groups, many different companies to try to fit all the needs of the horse racing industry. And this was by far the most affordable and the most flexible with us.
That's great. I think
one other part we use on it, Jay.
Okay.
We make it mandatory that, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but we make it mandatory that all jockeys at time of licensing now have to sign a private health information release and a consent to treat release. In the United States, under the HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, you can't share that information unless they have an express written consent. Well, our EMTs couldn't tell me as a steward that a rider was off. Mm-hmm. And similar to your world, the event still goes on, and we might need to replace that rider. We need to know what's happening. Well, legally, they couldn't tell us. And this is something that's done from every toddler sport in the U.S. all the way up to pro. We're one of the few sports that didn't use these consent to treat and release of private health information. Now, when Dr. Ryan, if she has a rider go down at Laurel, I'm just 60 miles up the road or so at Delaware Park, and she alerts the system that, hey, this rider needs to be seen. I don't see the medical part of it. I only have the alert that this rider is not medically cleared. I will not know any of the medical information. But
we have a warning system.
Instantly aware that there's a rider that's down. So that's another integral part of it. And also the educational part to the riders, that they start to understand more on how to, help themselves in terms of making sure that they're getting the proper treatment for a concussion. And they know now, they go down, hey, you got to see Dr. Kelly. I send a lot of them down there too, and it's working very, very well, especially on the communication level. On the regulator side, it's a godsend for us. So.
Communication is key, and especially when you're talking about concussions, because again, it is that second blow, third blow to the head that is really where the safety factor comes in. I can't imagine a better panel. You guys are amazing. Dr. Kelly, Ryan, Robert Colton, Eric Vanderhelm, thank you so much. You guys have just been great to work with. My producers are already sending me messages saying we need to do another show with you guys right away. They love you. So thank you so much.
All day.
Well, it's such a great topic. So thanks for joining us. Join Jumping Instructors live this Wednesday at 1 p.m. on the Rider Position Fix-It Show, when host Laura Kelland-May will be discussing riding topics and sharing ideas and exercises. Every Wednesday, we look at pictures that you send in where you can get involved by asking questions and commenting to help improve your riding. Thanks so much to everyone. We'll see you next week on the Jay Duke Show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.